house for a Friday holiday evening, and thank you all so much for coming out. My name is Chai Vassarelli. I'm a filmmaker, and it is my great honor to be here with Wim, who's a personal idol, if not an icon, of mine, and to talk about this gorgeous, like drippingly gorgeous film. So Wim.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Let's see.
So I've long been an admirer of Anselm Kiefer, and I feel like he's incredibly unique in how he can conjure heaviness in a light way. You know, it's like there's like he somehow, like by looking at something and creating this piece, he kind of somehow forgives us for the heaviness of it. And I guess so that's my observation, but so first off, what inspired you to make this film, and how long have you known his work? You clearly know him personally, and just like, where was the genesis?
Genesis is, on one hand, that I really wanted to know more about how his mind worked, and on the other, I knew him for 30 years, and we had become friends on a very short notice. In the film you see an exhibition he had in Germany in '91 at the National Gallery, just before he had a triumphant tour in America, Chicago, Los Angeles, MoMA here, and he was the hottest painter on the planet, and then he came home and had his big exhibition in Germany, and he was setting that up in Berlin, and it took him 3 weeks. Maybe you remember, it's with all these huge leaden planes, and it was a big show. And he set it up for 3 weeks, and on his first evening he went out to look for a place to eat, and he landed in the restaurant where I went every night. Because I was editing, and once I go to a place I always go back. So I was eating, and in comes this guy who's obviously there for the first time. He looks around, doesn't quite know if this is a place that is fine with him or for him, smokes a big cigar, which was fine in the place because everybody was smoking anyway. It was 1991. I was still a chain smoker myself. He sees there's only one table with a seat, and it's mine, and he sits down, and I realize it's Anselm Kiefer. I did know his work. I'd seen shows. I was at the Documenta in Kassel, but I never met him. And he recognized me. He had seen Wings of Desire in Paris, Texas. So we started to talk, a little bit shy. And then we were the last people to leave the restaurant, and he asked me, what do you do tomorrow? I said, I'm always here. He said, I come again. We continued that for 3 weeks, and we became really very close, and we talked like I'd never talked to any other painter in my life. We spoke about everything, and I knew everything about him, and he about me. He knew that I really had wanted to become a painter, and I knew that he had just made a movie and that he was dreaming of making more of them. So in the end, we shook hands on the idea that the two of us were bound to do something together. He also showed me the exhibition. On the day when it opened, I read the newspapers, and I was shocked. This show that I had really loved and thought was tremendous, it was either totally misunderstood or the Germans had something against him. I don't know. It was one bad review after another, and I thought, how is he going to survive this? I felt really pity for him, and I saw him, and he was at the opening, and he was shocked, and he was, I don't know. A few months later, he moved to France. Couldn't blame him. But anyway, we kept that dream alive, and every now and then we saw each other and said, we have to do it, you know. But I was glad that time was passing, because I had no idea how I would make a movie about him. I loved his work, and a lot of it was mysterious to me. And that question about the heaviness, I mean, heavy physically, yes, because a lot of the stuff, these planes that he built in lead, you need... Yeah,
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble. She's going to shoot you.
I'll actually throw an Anselm piece at you.
That will do it. Anyway, these planes are heavier than real planes. They're made of lead. And so heaviness is a strange thing, because he does use heavy materials. But I feel that he transcends some of the heavy subjects that he's been treating, and he brings them closer to us. And if you get involved in his work, and if you follow the leads that he gives you, and the quotes of some of the quotes are from poets that are in his paintings, you slowly find a way to be surprised by their lightness, and by the lightness of being that he himself carries in himself. So I've always been really curious. I wanted to see him working, and I wanted to find out more about this incredible output of his. And we met, we continued meeting, but at the same time was quite happy that he didn't ask me what about the movie, because I didn't know how I could do it, until he invited me in 2019. He called me, hadn't spoken for a long time, and he had a very clear purpose. Wim, you have never been in Bajac. You know now what Bajac means, you've seen it. He said, you've never been there. No, I said, never been there. You know I've never been there. I've been at his studio and I've seen shows of his, but I've never been in the south of France. He said, you've got to come. Whenever you have couple of days, please get into a train, because don't take a plane, that's cumbersome. Come by train and I come pick you up. And I spent a whole day in Bajac. And that day did it for me. I was all on my own. He gave me a map. I walked around with a map, saw all this for the first time. It was very smart of his to not guide me, but just drop me there and says, you're going to get along. Everything was open, every building was open. I could see everything, underground, overground. I was completely blown away. And the experience was such that I thought it would be great to be able to pass on that experience. So in the evening when we come together again, and he had made something to eat for us, he was alone there, he said, so, but I said, yes. It's now or never, I think.
Good talk.
And that's really it. I said, well, let's do it. And 4 or 5 months later, we started shooting. I told him, I can't do it in one go. I have to come back several times, and I have to come visit you in Paris, and I don't know how long it'll take. And he had only one condition. The condition was, promise me that you'll surprise me. I do have no desire to read a treatment or script or whatever. Don't show me anything. I will never come to your editing room. Please, one thing. Promise me that you will surprise me. I thought that was a tall order, and he put, the tension was on, but I promised.
Okay, so that would make me cry. I would be on the floor of my edit room for a long time crying. But that brings us to the question of craft. I mean, the film is absolutely gorgeous, and it's interesting when you watch it. Like for me, I kind of saw the delight in making it. I mean, where the camera is placed every single time. But can you just kind of open it up, like explain it to us about like why 3D, how 3D? How did you actually surprise him? And what was the intention there?
It wasn't all delight, I tell you the truth.
Oh, good.
I was
Heavy
scared.
stuff.
I was scared shitless for a while.
But isn't that refreshing?
It is scary. Not knowing how to do this is scary. But then again, I thrive on not knowing how to do, because that is the beauty of what we do, that we can find out how to do it. And I must say, on the first shoot, we shot 7 times over 2.5 years, and each time 10 days. There's not much in the cut from the first shoot. It was like a tourist in his universe. But then I slowly understood, and the more we shot, and the better I understood how to approach it, and how my language, and my language was the medium you just saw, 3D, and you had these glasses on. And that was a great language for me to face his universe, because from that first experience on, the first day on that I walked through Bajac, I realized this is maybe not so much a movie, but this needs a translator to pass on that experience to an audience. And I know from all the shows I've seen of Anselm, and every piece I know, it touches you when you're there with it and when you're in front of it. And it's more an experience, not only by the size, it's only by the layers and by the time that he builds into his work. So experience was more for me the key than something with structure or something that could help you in any other way. I really wanted you to be confronted with the work. And so my language tried to enable you to see this work without opinion. For me, that was almost the most important thing, because Anselm does create lots of opinions. A lot of people hate him, and a lot of people love him, but everybody loves to immediately start with opinions. And I feel, I don't know, I'm not a filmmaker who conveys an opinion about something. I want to convey my admiration or my respect or my love for something, and then I'd rather leave the opinion to you, to the audience. So my job and my craft was really how to make his craft appear in front of you as an experience. You might see the same film again in 2D. Like a lot of people will see it in 2D, and maybe they see it later on television or on their home video, whatever, and they see it flat, and it's a different thing. It's still a great movie, I feel, because I worked hard also on the 2D version, but it's not an experience, it's more like a conventional film. It is more storytelling. And what you see now in 3D was less storytelling and more exposure to an experience. And that's what I thought my task was. And it was tough to find a language, because I know 3D and I've done it repeatedly, but this was like a first time I had to learn by doing.
It's interesting, because I think what you're talking about reminds me of something that I've always taken from Anselm's work itself. Like I was recently in London and saw the Finnegan's Wake exhibit at the White Cube, and I keep on thinking of this Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, which is the idea of, like transition. Like it's this idea of like something that's not permanent, impermanence. And I think that's experience, right? Like that you have an experience that's very unique, but it's ephemeral. And I guess like in terms of the craft itself, you mentioned briefly just now like the non-narrative, but how did you find that?
I found it through a method that I've never been able to use. I always thought it might be great, but this is the first time I applied it. We shot 7 times. I spent 10 years with him. I went back and edited for 2-3 months. I really looked at it every day. I looked at it and studied it and tried to understand how I could have done it better and how I could have done it so it was more appropriate. And of course, that was more of a correspondence. And the next time I knew better. And So it was a continuous going back and forth in the editing room, shooting, realizing I missed that and I missed that, and then going back and having fine-tuned my instruments better. And slowly the whole thing came together, and I had to surprise him. So I had to do things that I didn't know before myself. So, and we started the whole thing on a very long, in-depth talk, because I was convinced I'm not going to ask him any question in the course of the film. No talking heads, nobody else is going to talk about his work, and certainly not himself. So I needed to at least get rid of all my questions. So we spoke for a week, every day, 7-8 hours, long conversations about each and every subject that could come up. Childhood, mythology, history, science, everything I could possibly think of that I might want to know in the course of the film, I asked him. And then afterwards I had a Bible. It was 2000, well, it was not 2000. First, when they printed it out for me, it was 2000. I said, you have to format it so it's half as long. So I had 1,000 pages, and that was everything I needed to know. And I never asked him any more questions. But in these conversations, he gave me quite a lot of ideas what I can possibly do in order to get that out. So when we spoke about childhood, for instance, I realized that he was one of these people who learned so much as a kid that he was still using it, and that he was still thriving on the child he had kept intact in him. And if you know him, if you get to know him, you realize he's actually one of these people who has access to the childhood creativity. And I think that's marvelous. I always love that when I detect the child in somebody. And some of the great people I met had that. So I didn't dare thinking about shooting with the child, but I always wondered, how can I get close to that? And only the last shoot we then shot with a little boy, and shot something that I took lots of liberties on, because Anselm had told me, first of all, he was always by the river, and every day he took his bike to the river and was by the River Rhine, which I knew a lot about because 500 kilometers further up north, I was by the same river also every day. And we were living in the same country that didn't exist anymore and tried to reinvent itself. And all that we had in common, but the river was something that I really understood. And then he told me that he loved doing his homework on the stairs of the nearby castle. And I really wondered, I didn't know that castle, and I really wondered, why did he tell me that? He repeated it, that he went there quite often and did his homework there. And then I went there, and I realized, you saw the castle. You've seen it. I realized he was not just on the stairs. He must have been inside. And the caretaker of the castle, said his aunt was the cleaning lady at the time in the castle. So she must have let him in. And he must have seen it. And anybody who sees that beauty and that richness and that vastness as a kid, it must have opened his eyes in an amazing way. So I didn't ask him. I just shot it. So it was one of the things that really surprised him. It also surprised him that I had shot with his own son, who
plays the 30-year-old Anselm, right?
Let's say 40.
40, okay. Somewhere under 50.
Somewhere under 50. He should have been a little bit younger, but so he plays somewhere around 40. And he plays Anselm in during that decade when not a single art historian, no gallerist, no art person, nobody ever visited him. Sometimes he took his canvases to Düsseldorf and showed them to Joseph Beuys, but nobody ever came and saw him work. And he really laid the foundation for his entire work in this time when he's living as an unknown painter. His wife earned the living of the family. She was a teacher there, and he took care of the kids. So that kid, the older son, was always with him, and he was always playing under the canvases and under the easels, and he was on the back of his bike when Anselm went to photograph. And it was only through his son that I realized how much he had photographed. And actually that, well, I also found out in the studios that all his entire work was photography based and reality based in the beginning. So when I asked his son, who had been my main source of information about this time, this blank space in the life of Anselm, in the end I asked him to play the part, to play that and be his father, and he was very scared. He said, well, I'm not an actor. He said, your father is not an actor either. And then he said, I have to call him and ask him. I said, you will not call him. I promised I was going to surprise him. You're not going to ruin my surprise.
Director.
And your father gave me all liberties, so let's take that liberty. And he was still scared, and he was very, very scared of the moment that his father would see him playing him. But they both survived it.
No generational trauma there.
Actually, it made something really fantastic between the two of them. They are much better son and father ever since.
I mean, that comes across. And I think it brings me kind of to my last question, which is, there's something about Anselm's work that is anthropic. You know, it's both dealing with man and what is more than man. And it reminds me, so I think that one, the way you shot that castle is astonishing. You know, because immediately as a viewer, I was able to understand the connection. And I think it's that one shot with the mirror in the door, you know, where it's fractured. And it's like you can kind of see yourself, you can see yourself looking through his young eyes. But, you know, your use of real archive in this film, as well as the present day, as well as the reenactments, kind of makes me think about the past and the present. And I'm kind of like, as our closing question, I'd be curious if you could speak to kind of what does the present have to learn from the past?
Anselm fought his lifetime heroically against forgetting. And the driving force of his art was that fight against forgetting. And it's still driving him. And he still has this thing about time, about past and future and present. And I think his main ambition as a painter, I say that, I mean, it just comes to me, was to be able to capture time somehow in his painting and in his sculptural work. And he does everything in the book to ruin his paintings. Although he puts his paintings in an oven for weeks, like they're in the Sahara. He puts them on fire, he throws lead on them, dust, ashes. He does everything to ruin them. And in the end, you realize the only interest he wants to put time in them, and he wants them to be able to speak of time. Present, past, future, and they're somewhere in between, and they connect the two. And his effort to fight against forgetting is really a heroic thing. And I must say, the more we shot and the more time I spent with him, I really realized that was the ethos of his work. And I do respect him so much for it, because I did the opposite. I had the same childhood. I had the same impression something was solidly wrong, and there is no future if people do not have a past, and a country with no past cannot be a country. And then you sense it, and you get older, and you understand it. And my reaction was just out. Let me out. I went out into the world and wanted to leave this country behind. And Anselm's reaction was the opposite. He really dug deeper and deeper, and he made himself quite vulnerable this way. And he got bashed a lot for this fight against forgetting. So that is something I really learned from it, and that's something I didn't know before, and all our conversations 30 years ago, I had not known that. I had not realized what the driving force was, and then I realized.
Well, this has been so special. So everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thanks so much.